and I'm delighted to see many people are joining us this evening. This is fantastic, and I welcome you all, and I'm sure you will enjoy this series tonight. Just before we get cracking, I ask everybody to please make sure you mute your microphone so that we don't interfere with the presentations. I also request you switch off your videos because these disturb and also take up a lot of bandwidth. And please, as we go through, post your questions on the chat group. We will endeavor to finish by 7 p.m. So just a quick review of what we've been doing so far. In July, we discussed interpreting EBVs and sale catalogs. August, days to carving, importance and how to record. In September, we looked at interpreting completeness of performance reports and how to improve star ratings. And tonight, we will be looking at carcass traits and the value of RTU scanning for cattle breeders. And we have two presenters for tonight. Jody Young, a technical assistant at Simbra, will be telling us what are we actually measuring and what's the value of the records that we are measuring. And Meki Schneider, our chairman of the LRF, will be talking about, okay, so what's the practical use of the breeding values from these scan results, breeding values of carcass merits. We do have another two lined up for the balance of the year. On the 14th of November, Prof. Costa will talk about the impact and management of inbreeding and genetic conditions in beef cattle, something I'm looking forward to. And on the 6th of December, Prof. Carson from the University of the Free State will be talking about genomics, why all the fuss, and we are delighted to bring this topic to you, particularly on the back of the Brahmin, Southern African Brahmins. We've just been informed by ABRI that they are happy with the data we have, and we'll be switching over to single-step BLUP evaluations to give us genomic EBVs. This will improve the accuracy of the estimates of our breeding values. So something to look forward to and quite exciting developments on that front. Just to remind you all, LRF is a membership association bringing together all our members that use a similar platform that is marketed by ABRI, the Agricultural Business Research Institute, and the main program or suite of programs all fall under Breed Plan. So we've got SA Braford, Brahman, Brangus, Wagyu, Limousin, Simbra, Simmentala, the SA Holstein, but we also have the Namibian Stud Breeders Association and all the stud breeders in Namibia, and we have all we have the Zimbabwe Herd Book and all the breeders under the ZHB. As I've mentioned, our primary function is to assist members to implement the world's leading genetic evaluation software to best advantage, and this is Breed Plan. This is the system that we use for estimating genetic breeding values of all the traits we measure. I just want to touch on our flagship event of the year. This year, a few weeks ago, we held the 15th LRF Stockman School. The theme was Profit Drivers in Bull Selection. We had over 134 people. This is an annual 3-day event. We had a wide range of local, regional, and international presenters, and we exposed all the attendees to the latest technologies and experiences in animal production. This year's event was a real cracker, a mixture of in-class and in the field. We evaluated cattle, both live assessment and scan assessment. We also measured the carcasses, and we had a wide range of sponsors supporting us. Without these sponsors, we couldn't hold such an event. And the reason why I'm bringing this to you now, please plan for it next year. We will be holding it in the second week of October. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over the reins to Jody Young to kick us off on the trade for tonight, Carcass trades, the value of RTU scanning for cattle breeders. Let me stop share and hand over to Jody.
Thank you, Mario. I'm going to share my screen. Please just let me know that it is up and running.
Yes, you're on. Thanks, Jody.
Perfect. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Mario. Just a brief introduction of myself. I am currently busy with my Master of Agricultural Science degree in Animal Science, majoring in Production Physiology and Product Quality. And I'm also working at the Simba Society of Southern Africa. So this presentation this evening will be on RTU scanning. And as you can see, I plan to say a lot in a very short space of time, but essentially we are going to cover the what, the how, the when of RTU scanning, and importantly, the why. So if we have a look at what is RTU scanning, RTU simply stands for the real-time ultrasound scanning. And as the name suggests, this is ultrasound technology, which is a non-invasive technology where we are measuring body composition of the animal. And what this is giving us is an indication or a prediction of the carcass traits that we might expect. And we are doing this in the live animal. Indirectly, what we are measuring is growth. So we might ask the question of why is growth important? We need to consider growth in terms of how body tissues develop in relation to each other. And we can also do this if we look at maturity. And before I address maturity, we need to distinguish between chronological age and physiological age. So chronological age is the actual age of the animal. So if an animal was born 200 days ago, that animal is 200 days old. But the physiological age of the animal is how far that animal is from maturity or sexual maturity. And this becomes important when we consider how bone, muscle, and fat develop in relation to each other. So if we have a look at the graph on the right-hand side, this was taken from a chapter written by Horsner in 2005, and he adapted this graph. So if we have a look at the x-axis, we have essentially time, conception to maturity, and then on the y-axis we have the rate of weight gain. And important to note here is that this is not an indication of the sequential development of tissues. So it's not saying one develops after the other. It's indicating the rate of weight gain of each tissue. So in very early growth or very early development, developing at a faster rate is the head, the brain, and kidney fat tissues. That's then followed by the neck, bone, and intermuscular fat. And over there, I just want to take a moment to distinguish between intermuscular fat and intramuscular fat. Intermuscular fat is the fat between muscles, and intramuscular fat is the fat within a muscle. And generally, when we are talking about RTU scanning, we are more talking about intramuscular fat. So just to avoid that confusion, if we then have a look at point C, we have the thorax, muscle, and subcutaneous fat, and then that is followed by the tissues at point D, which is the loin fat and intramuscular fat. And what this graph is indicating is that as the animal approaches maturity, we first have bone developing at a faster rate. That's followed by muscle, and that's followed by fat. And this is why growth is important, especially with RTU scanning, to get an indication of when these tissues are developing in relation to each other. So just an example, if we consider a later maturing animal compared to an earlier maturing animal, if you had to slaughter those animals at the same chronological age, you might expect that a late maturing animal would have less fat. That's just a physiological development of the animal. So that's just some background. What we are doing with RTU scanning is measuring the body composition, so muscle, fat, and bone. All right, so how does RTU scanning work? As I mentioned earlier, and the name suggests, it's ultrasound technology. This is high frequency sound waves. The literature I've read, it's 2 to 10 megahertz. And there is a probe which emits sound waves, and this penetrates the different tissues. And depending on the density of those tissues, it will then reflect the frequency back, or the waves back. And the probe will then pick up these waves and it will generate an image on the monitor. The monitor is then when certain calculations can be made and you can visualize what you have just measured. So when we are measuring RTU, or in RTU scanning, what we are measuring is eye muscle area, often shortened to the acronym EMA. And then we also have rib fat depth or back fat thickness. And because we are quite lazy, we often just say rib fat. Similar with rump fat depth, we frequently just say rump fat, but it can also be referred to as P8. And then lastly, we have intramuscular fat, often shortened to IMF. Okay, so now if we have a look at the types of measurement, all these measurements are not necessarily the same. So similar to how we have weights, these are types of measurements. So your eye muscle area is a cross-sectional area of the rib eye muscle. Your rib fat and your rump fat are subcutaneous fat depths. Subcutaneous just means below the skin. So how much fat there is below the skin. And IMF is a percentage of fat in the rib eye. It's a percentage measurement. And then just to further clarify, if we have a look at the units of measurement, eye muscle area is in centimeters squared, rib fat and rump fat are both in millimeters, and your intramuscular fat is a percentage. Now, if we consider where the measurements are taken, you will notice that the longissimus dorsi muscle, or the region between the 12th and 13th rib, pops up quite a lot. So your eye muscle area, your rib fat, and your IMF are all roughly in a similar region. However, your rump fat is taken at the P8 site, or another way is to say between the hook and pin bones. And this is just the anatomical regions where these measurements are taken. This is a diagrammatic representation of where the measurements are taken. If we have a look at point 1, that is the intramuscular fat. That is a longitudinal image that is taken parallel to the backbone. And generally, there isn't only one image taken here, it's multiple. If we look at point 2, that will be the rib eye area and the back fat thickness. And lastly, point 3 is the rump fat. So how are these scans taken? Before the scans can be taken, there needs to be a little bit of preparation. So if the hair is too long, you clip the hair between in the 12th to 13th rib region, as well as the rump region. And then there is a apparatus called the standoff, which just slides onto the probe. And this is to accommodate for the curvature of the body and just makes the scanning a bit easier. And then the body regions are oiled. Then when it comes to image collection, this can differ depending on protocol or technician. Generally, there's a minimum of 5 images taken. So 1 for the rump fat, 1 for eye muscle area, 1 for rib fat, and then the intramuscular fat minimum is about 3, but it can be 4 measurements where the average is then taken off of those measurements. This is just a very, very short video just to give a quick indication of what happens. You will notice that the animal is oiled in the 12th to 13th rib region, and then the scan is taken with the probe, which then generates the image on the monitor where the measurements are then taken. Okay, so now if we have to consider what do these measurements actually mean? The eye muscle area is giving you an indication of how much muscle is in the live animal. And in the carcass, this can give us an indication of the lean product. The rib fat is a prediction of the external fat on the animal, and this can affect your retail product yield. And we will touch on it a little bit later, but generally as your body fat or your rib fat increases, your product yield will decrease. Similar to your rib fat, your rump fat is a measure of the external body fat. It's an additional measure, and it becomes important when you consider it with the other traits, particularly with rib fat. And it gives you together, those measurements give you a more overall image of the fat coverage on the animal. Then your intramuscular fat, as I mentioned earlier, is the fat between muscle cells, or rather within a muscle. And this is giving us an objective measurement of marbling. So if we have to now consider the value of measurement, the why you might consider. And I've just generally separated this into two parts, the one being eye muscle area and the other one being fat. So your eye muscle area, it's a common estimate of the total muscle in the animal. So that's giving you an indication of the product yield or the lean product. And as I mentioned earlier, as your eye muscle area increases, your retail product yield increases. And then if we have to consider fat, fat is important for many different reasons, just to touch on a few. Fertility, the onset of puberty and subsequent reproduction, it has a lot of value in terms of fertility, as well as excessive subcutaneous fat can decrease your carcass yield. And importantly is also the overall fat coverage of that carcass. And this becomes important with carcass chilling. So if you do not have even fat coverage on the carcass, your carcass chills at different rates. And this can, in some instances or extreme instances, lead to things like cold shortening. So your even fat coverage of the carcass certainly does have value. Some important points to consider is the animal condition when you scan. The animal needs to be in good condition in order to show the variation in the genetic differences for that to show. So animals that have been in poor condition, but they have put on the required fat in a short period of time might not show this variation. So your animals need to be growing at a rate that will show or express the differences in lean and fat deposition in order, for that to be shown. So Breed Plan has, they have a rough guide where they indicate that the minimum average rump fat depth should be between 4 and 5 millimeters, minimum average rib fat depth to be 3 millimeters, and the IMF results will be optimized if the IMF is between, or the average IMF of the animals being scanned is between 2 and 8%. And there really does need to be adequate fat deposition for the scanning to be of value. Further points to consider is that commonly bulls are scanned, but it is also recommended to scan heifers. Heifers are early maturing, so if we consider what was discussed earlier, this is valuable for IMF. You might also want to scan steers. This will give you an indication of their size and their dams, but these are just certain points to consider. And as with all traits, it's important to have as many animals in a management group as possible so that you can have as many contemporaries to compare against. So just to further emphasize that on the right-hand side, don't only scan select animals, don't only scan your sale bulls. You really need to get a full scope of all the variation that is present. And then very importantly is the correlation between carcass traits as well as the correlation between carcass traits and other traits. And it is here where I want to emphasize or to stay cautious of single trait selection. This is where value of indexes come in hand. But just to mention a few, there are many correlations and relationships. But for example, if you are looking at increased marbling, if that's all you focus on, you might see decreased percentage in meat yield. So you don't only want to be chasing one trait. If you look at eye muscle area and its relationship with frame size, you might end up with bigger frame size and increased maintenance costs and impact on reproduction. And yeah, so just wary of single trait selection. Next up is when to RTU scan. So the breed plan analysis will scan animals between 300 and 800 days of age. This has to be done by an accredited scanner. With that being said, majority of animals are scanned roughly as rising 2-year-olds, so around 600 days, and just re-emphasizing the rising plane of nutrition to ensure those animals are in good condition. Just to briefly touch on the LRF test plan, to put it all in perspective, this is just a snapshot of the test plan, but the ultrasound scanning is of course on here, and it is recommended to take or to align this with your 400 or 600 day weight, just to minimize handling of the animals. Again, the age range 300 to 800 days, and importantly on here is the slice group, which is 60 days. So animals that are born within 60 days of each other will be analyzed in a group together. All right, so the important part is why scan, or we could perhaps say the advantages. Right up on the list is that it is an objective measure. It's an objective measure of the body composition of the animal. It is also in the live animal, and it is in real time. So we don't have to wait the entire lifespan of that animal to know what its carcass looks like, to then make decisions on that animal as a parent. Then is the heritability of these traits. They are at least moderate to highly heritable, which gives us an indication that genetic progress can be made in selection for these traits. Then to mention is the correlation of RTU measured traits and actual carcass measurements. So that's not with a camera, that's measurements taken on the physical carcass. The correlation between those are generally considered to be highly correlated with each other. Then if we are comparing the data between animals scanned within a contemporary group, it allows us to make selection decisions based on relative differences. And I'm sure Meki will touch on this. And then lastly on this slide is that if we collect this data, we are contributing towards the calculation of carcass EBVs. And this is a valuable tool to evaluate and select animals as parents based on these carcass traits. And if we don't measure, we don't know. So the breed plan carcass EBVs that are currently available encompass all the traits we've spoken about. So your eye muscle area, your rib fat, your rump fat, your intramuscular fat, as well as carcass weight, which is in kilograms, and then your percent retail beef yield. So just a definition of these EBVs, I'm taking this directly from breed plan. Essentially, these EBVs are estimates of the genetic differences between animals in the respective traits. And just to try and explain that in a few examples, if we have a look at example 1, we have animal A with an eye muscle area of +4 centimeters squared, and animal B with an eye muscle area of +1 centimeter squared. And over here, we might expect that animal A would produce steer progeny with a larger eye muscle area than animal B. Similar is in example B, we have animal C with a rib fat of -0.4 millimeters and animal D with a rib fat of +0.4 millimeters. Over here, you might expect animal A to produce leaner calves compared to animal D. Similar to the rib fat, in example 3, we have rump fat, where you might expect animal A in this example to produce leaner calves than animal B. And finally, with IMF, in example 4, we have animal C with a +0.8 IMF, animal D with a +0.1 IMF. And here you might expect that animal C would produce progeny that would express more marbling than animal D. Just to give you an indication of how these EBVs are represented, you have the breed plan EBV table, and at the top it indicates which breed plan run this was from. So this is a October 2023 breed plan run, and then it indicates all the traits for which there are EBVs, the EBV value with the EBV accuracy, and then at the bottom is the breed average for that EBV. So just for an example, if we have a look at the rib fat of this animal, its EBV is plus 0.5 with a 50% accuracy, whereas the breed average is negative 0.3 millimeters. So in this instance, you might expect the breed average to be leaner than this animal. Finally, in the traits analyzed, it will indicate the exact traits for which this animal has been analyzed. An animal can have an EBV if it doesn't actually have that measurement itself. If it does have the measurement, the accuracy does increase. So just to summarize, RTU scanning is essentially measuring the body composition, and what I mean by that is the proportions of muscle, fat, and bone in relation to each other. What this is doing is giving us an indication of what we might expect in the carcass. The eye muscle area holds value in terms of predicting the amount of muscle in the animal, and this is the lean product that we might expect. Then we have fat, which has many points to consider. Just to mention a few is the even fat coverage and the product yield. And then finally, with all these measurements, we can get carcass EBVs, which are a useful tool to evaluate and select animals as parents based on these traits. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jody. I will now switch over to Meki, and I'm sure Izan will be sharing the screen for Meki, and Meki will come and give his presentation.
Okay, Mario, thank you very much, and good evening. Let me try to share my screen and see if it works. All right. Mario is on. Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir. Carry on.
Good. All right. So from my side, I'm Meki Schneider. I'm a stud breeder. I'm doing RTU scanning for quite some time now, virtually more than 17 years. And I want to just zoom in on what we do in practice and how we use RTU scanning in practice. A lot of what Jody has said, I will just repeat. That doesn't do any harm. It will just re-emphasize this again. So I just want to start with some fundamental approaches of scanning, how we approach it as stud breeders, because we supply cattle to the stud cattle to the market, and that market then uses those traits which we deliver. So there are a couple of issues which I want to mention. There might be more important economic traits, like for example fertility, but the carcass data is also of value because we as producers are paid on carcass attributes. And we all know the classification system. There are certain attributes which we are paid by. It has thus got financial considerations, and that's why I'm doing it. That's why I would encourage everybody to engage here. To buy genetics which expresses this. I want to mention a couple of other attributes which I have assessed, but we'll discuss this a bit later. So strongly recommend, and that's what we do here, that we scan both males and females. And if you can, all males and all females in those two contemporary groups, 400 days to 600 days. The criteria Jody has mentioned, it's between 300 and 800 days. Our cattle come from the field, so we keep them in contemporary groups with various sires, which is very important to keep linkages. And we have, in the last probably 5 or 8 years, we have tried to scan at a later age. You see there on top, it's 800 days, even up to 2 years, because our cattle from the veld do not express enough fat at a younger age. We've got 2 breeding seasons. That makes it a bit of a challenge. We should thus scan twice a year, but we only scan once, and that is now lately the 600-day and the older cattle up to 720 days, 2 years. So we've got a number of bulls which we do feed efficiency tests with at an NFA test station, and they of course are scanned at a younger age of about 400 days roughly. So just to summarize, if you do scanning, do it as late as possible and that the animals are in a good condition. So we here do weigh animals on the same day that we scan them. They anyway come through the crush. It is not a requirement, but it just adds to the data which you submit. You can submit 2 400-day weights, and you can submit 2 600-day weights. So, and that is correlated with carcass weight. So if they come through the crush, you can just as well weigh them. I've said we scan them from the veld. We do that usually in May. That is when our cattle are in best condition, varying between April and June, because then they express the genetic differences better, and you can pick them up better. And that's why we do that. And as stated by Jody, the average rib fat should ideally be 3 millimeters. I try to judge that by eye. I've slaughtered a lot of cattle already, but that's not so easy, depending on the breed, of course, also. But in general, I think we have scanned animals with a rib fat, on average, below 3 millimeters, but we still get the results. At present, I've said we're doing this for a long time now, since 2007. There are, on our records, 4,400 scanned animals and data available. And we do this on a yearly basis by a breed plan accredited ultrasound scanning technicians. These are people who have gone through a course to do this properly. Now, for us, fat is the important selection criteria, but as everybody says, don't single trait select, take a balanced approach, and I will mention that a bit later. But our focus in the last 4 to 5 years has been more on fertility, fat, and NFI. Those are the 3 which we try to zoom in. Not every time successful, but we are satisfied with growth, and all the other traits, those 3 traits are what we focus on, and fat is definitely one important component which we try to zoom in. This is a breed plan scanner, accredited, Petrus Maritz, one of the first ones in Southern Africa. And as Jody has said, that is scanned between the 13th and 14th rib for rib fat, eye muscle area, and intramuscular fat. Just by the way, our first scanning was done by Matt Wilcock himself here on the farm when he came to Southern Africa to introduce this technology. Now, the traits are measured. Jody has mentioned them. What do we emphasize here? This is another photo of a scanner at one of the cattle posts, which we set up where the cattle are. So the first trait is the eye muscle area, and the eye muscle area is strongly correlated with the overall muscling of the animal. So if you look at the size of the eye muscle area, the bigger it is, you will also find that the animal in general has got more overall muscling, and hence it enhances the meat value. I had a good discussion with Paul Williams when he was here 2 weeks ago. You can also overdo it, and he has shown me cases where you can see the start of double muscling if you just over-select for eye muscle area. The second trait which we consider, and I see on the chat box there was a question, is a rib and rump fat, which we focus in, because we believe, and we've seen that, it's a higher rib and rump fat is an earlier maturing type animal. It's always got a better condition score because it's got that genetic advantage. It's earlier reproductive maturing. You will find those animals which are fertile, have got more fat. Just this afternoon, in preparation for the talk, I selected the 17 best fertile animals in our herd of about 500 cows, females, starting from -20 days down to -12. And we noticed that the fat of those animals, 90% of those animals lie in the top 10% of the fat, rib and rump fat values on the EBVs. So the fourth point is it's easier second calf pregnancy rate, because that is mostly our problem, that second calf, that cow doesn't get pregnant again. If it's got a better rib and rump fat, that will be easier for her. In our case, Namibia, we do a lot of field marketing of the field, and those animals with a higher fat value, they do market easier and quicker. They don't need this longer period to finish. So we believe this is a lower maintenance type of animal if the rib and rump fat are high. The intermuscular fat, it is not such an accurate measurement, but for us, it gives a definite trend. And as Jody has also said, that is mainly to promote the eating quality. And we at the LRF, we are doing in-depth study at the moment, how we can improve this measurement of the intermuscular fat. And then, of course, there's the next trait under scanning is the carcass retail beef yield. For us, this is not so important. There are a lot of other factors because we are actually paid in terms of kilogram. So a growth is also one important trait. I just want to show you on that screen, when you do the ultrasound scanning, this is the eye muscle area between the 12 and 13 rib. The scanner marks this area and thereby comes up with a figure of square centimeter, roughly between 70 to 80 square centimeter for various animal sizes. And at the top here, you can also measure the fat depth of rib fat. At the bottom here, you've got that that piece of meat which fits into this picture on top, just to show you where the eye muscle area is. This plot is actually very important to us because it indicates to us, sorry, I must go back. It indicates to us for every year from 2009 to 2021, all calves born, every calf is recorded at birth. And when it comes to scanning at 600 days to 2 years, then we scan about 70 to 75% of all those calves. So this is a fairly high ratio, including both males and females. You can see everywhere that small dip in 2007. I just realized that dipped up the last few days, and I can imagine that some data is missing here. But what is important here also is that the amount of animals stay roughly the same, about 70-75% of all calves born, and the data for intramuscular fat that increases slightly over the last years, which actually probably means that we've got more animals now which exhibit more fat. This is a slide which I just want to briefly show. So for each trait, we've got different bands which we consider desirable. If we look at stud bulls, we would like those stud bulls to fall into this green band, and especially for rib and rump fat, we will chase those highest values here, which we can get. Of course, not always easy, but that is what we try to chase if we buy bulls, because bulls are the most important contributor to genetic progress. This is from the October 2073 Namibian Brahman. The red is our herd. The genetic trends for carcass weight is increasing. The eye muscle area is also above the society average. That is Southern African Brahmins. The rib fat and rump fat we have been successfully pushing up in the last year again, which is very encouraging to us. But of course, there are many other traits, and it's not always easy to find the right type of genetic bulls to do that. But that is what we chase. Intramuscular fat has dropped down a bit. It's increasing again, and I said the retail beef yield is not one which we are focusing much, and we've dropped now below the society average. This is maybe a bit cluttered, but let me explain this. On the left-hand side, you've got all the different bulls. I think there are about 20 bulls or something, which we are using now in November this year, which will go into the herd in January. So these are all the bulls with all the traits. The arrangement index here at the back here, that the top line is the average. And if we, for each, the blue section here are the carcass traits. That's the eye muscle area. If we go down here, we get an average of all bulls, because those 18 bulls or 20 bulls, they will drive your genetic progress in the years to come. So they're important to us, that the average is what we're aiming at. So average of those eye muscle area is 1.2. The breed average is 0.6. The rib and rump fat is 0.9 and 1.1, with breed average is 0.03 and 0.03. We can also look at the fertility traits here. scrotal size and days to calving. But concerning fat, this is what we're aiming at. So the summary of all our stud bulls, they are the drivers for genetic progress. And if you consider that is the percentile table, so for fertility, we roughly lie for all cattle in the top 10 to 15%, days to calving in the top 25 to 20%, and rib and drum fat in the top 15%. So in our case, rib and drum fat is correlated quite strongly to the fertility traits also. If we would take all those bulls and take the bottom average of those bulls and say to ourselves, all those 18 bulls are now one bull. This is the bar chart of all those bulls. I think you can see gestation length is shorter. The birth weight is a bit heavier. We don't like that. It used to be a curve bender bull herd, but we've used an Australian bull with very high Australian progeny bull with very high birth weight, but he's got other traits. One of them being very feed efficient, but these are the drivers, and we especially look at the fertility here and the fat here. This thing we must bring around in the next years. There are some bulls which we used for certain other traits, but in our focus, I said it's fertility, it's fat, and net feed intake that we have to bring around to the right. We are busy with net feed intake for the last 7 years or so. We need time to swing that around. That is my last slide. This is one of our main stud sires now. He's a curve bender stud sire, lower birth weight, higher growth traits, and then of course rib and rump fat are also in the top. I would say here, if you look here at the right hand corner, that is probably in the top 5% of the breed, and that is what we're aiming at. So he's got good fertility, he's got good fat, and he's got fairly good feed efficiency. So apart from fat, there are other traits also which we select for, but fat, I just want to re-emphasize, is a very important trait. That's all from my side. Mario, Izan, thank you.
Mackie, thank you very, very much. And thanks to Jody. Thank you both for excellent presentations. And we have a few minutes left, and I see we've got a couple of questions coming through. I believe, Mackie, you addressed the fertility traits, so hopefully, Tabili, that Mackie's response addressed your question on how the carcass traits are linked to fertility. We have Johan Odendahl, who's posed an interesting question. Seeing that we in SA slaughter our cattle mainly between 18 and 24 months, what is the real value of RTU since we do such young animals and the intramuscular fat is really not there yet? And he's also comparing this with South America, where they slaughter between 30 months and US 30 to 42 months. Who would like to take a stab at that?
Mario, let me try to respond. I think it's true what you said, that it's done, that slaughtering is taking place at an early stage, and that the intramuscular fat has maybe not expressed itself so much. That is quite right. But I think for all breeds, we have to start focusing on this aspect. We maybe are not paid for this at the moment. For marbling, or intramuscular fat in most breeds, except for the Angus and the Wagyu maybe, but it is definitely an aspect which enhances eating quality. So I would encourage all breed societies to engage at the moment in this genetics, because if we can do it earlier, the better. But also the Wagyus, you have to feed them for a long period, very long period actually, to express that. But if you get the genetics right, you can probably do it at an earlier stage.
Thank you, Mickey. I believe you addressed that correctly. And as both you and Jody have mentioned on more than one occasion, if you don't measure, you don't know. And that's the big thing. We really do need to measure. And I agree with you, the trend going forward, we need to focus on meat eating quality. Welcome to Jorge from Argentina. Delighted you can join us. And Jorge would like to know what software we use to measure intramuscular fat. Jorge, I am not a specialist in the scanning equipment, but I do believe we use the MyLab one, and we do use that for all 4 measurements. I don't know if there's any scanners on board that can help address Jorge's question.
Well, I think not on the software, Mario. I think you've answered it as good as you can. But we have imported machines in Southern Africa. I think most of them come from Italy. Mario, do you know the make? And that would be the software which we use. Of course, to assess the data, we use the breed plan. If that is what you mean, it's the breed plan genetic assessment of the raw data that expresses the breeding values of that animal.
I think Jorge is wanting to know what software we use in the scanning machine, and that, to be honest, I've got no idea.
Good.
Are there any other questions? Really great to see over 54 participants. I see a new message has just popped up. Jorge is thanking us. Thank you, Jorge, and thank you for joining us. Are there any other questions that people would like to pose? We have a few minutes left, and I don't see any other messages. Johan, please, I see your hand, Hayes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mario. I would like to comment a little bit on Johan's question, Johan Odendahl's question. Apart from slaughter, I find value in the carcass traits, first of all, in the eye muscle area, because that's strongly correlated with slaughter percentage. You simply can't hang around to slaughter your stud bulls to find out what the slaughter percentage is going to be. I would like to know that at selection stage as young as possible, and certainly the scanning assists in that. Secondly, the rib fat, there is some correlation with early puberty. And we know that if you don't have fat cover on the ribs of your heifers, you can try to get them pregnant. You're probably not going to be very successful. But what this does for you, your results from rib fat scanning, is identify those animals with the ability to put on fat quite early and to get into puberty. So that for me personally is very important. And then generally, in the breed I farm with, we would like them a little bit more early maturing. And that's what both rib and rump fat will assist us in identifying those genetics that can make a difference to age of maturity. That's all I can add. Thank you, Mario.
Thank you, Johan. Are there any other points that people would like to raise? Something is interesting here. I'm not sure what's going on here. Right, I don't know what's going on, but thank you all very much for attending, and we're approaching 7 p.m. It remains for me once again to sincerely thank our two presenters, Jody and Meki, and thank you all for attending, and I look forward to welcoming you back in 2 weeks' time for our next presentation by Prof. Costa. With that, have a good evening and good night.